Welcome to the second episode about Barnum House. We will be exploring Barnum House's connection to the community of Grafton, Ontario. Eliakim Barnum was born in 1784 and settled in the area that became Grafton in 1807. He would have been in his early 20s at the time. By 1819, just 12 years later, he was a prominent businessman in the community. He owned a distillery and a tavern. By the 1830s, he also owned a mill. Let's discover how Grafton has changed over the years. In the early 1800s, this part of Upper Canada would have been populated by Indigenous people and early settler farmers. Many people who settled in the region that became Grafton were United Empire Loyalists. That is, they were loyal to the Crown and the British Empire after the American Revolution in 1776. By the 1830s, as United Empire Loyalists moved into the area, the Indigenous people were forced to move north to the shores of Rice Lake, to an area now known as the Alderville First Nations Reserve. A lot of the area surrounding Grafton was farmland, and it was difficult to be a farmer. Let's listen to this excerpt from a Scottish immigrant to the Grafton area, writing home to his father.
Dear Father, farming is very different from what it is at home and much harder work. No person need think to even make a living in Canada without working hard, excepting they have good capital. We have been busily employed getting in our crop. We have 6 acres of spring, 7 of fall wheat, 7 of peas, 3 of rye, 3 of barley sown, and we have 10 acres of oats to sow yet.
Grafton was not always called Grafton. In fact, it was first known as Grover's Tavern, after John Grover, an early resident. The name Grafton was adopted in 1832. The name probably refers back to John Grover's hometown in the United States. Barnum lived to be 94, and he died in 1877. He would have seen the transformation over the years of the small hamlet that he called home. From the 1840s to the 1860s, Grafton grew from a cluster of a few houses to a bustling town. Highway 2, the main road in the center of Grafton, would have been known as the Kingston Road, connecting the town to Kingston, a few hours away by horse and carriage. There were several inns and taverns where travelers could stop on their way to spend the night or get a hot meal. The small village also boasted many different businesses. As we said before, Barnum himself owned several of them. There was also a blacksmith shop and a cheese factory. Grafton grew so much over the years that by the 1870s it had its own train station. The station itself was a central stop for all trains, and the town of Grafton would supply milk and other goods to places as distant as Kingston and Toronto. There is still a rail line that runs through the town, but the station is long gone. In some senses, Grafton is frozen in time. Several buildings from the 1800s still stand, although their uses have changed over the years. Some buildings that are still used for their original purpose are the churches in Grafton. Barnum was a founding member of St. George's Anglican Church. The church was built in 1844 after many meetings by local Anglicans. Barnum himself was the treasurer of the building committee for St. George's. Barnum, his wife Hannah, their children, and their descendants are buried in the church's cemetery. St. Mary's Catholic Church was built much later in 1875. The church went through several different periods of restoration and decoration, one of the most recent being repair of the church's steeple. In the 1860s and 1870s, Grafton was a bustling community. It even got its own mention in the neighboring town of Cobourg's newspaper, the Cobourg Star. The weekly column, titled Latest Items from Grafton, reported on politics, social happenings, and other news items from the hamlet. Now that we've explored the early history of Grafton, think about the buildings and businesses in your neighborhood and community. Go for a walk and see if you can find any old buildings in your neighborhood. What types of stories do they tell? Think about the types of changes that have occurred in your community. Have there been positive changes for everyone? Why or why not? Thank you for listening. join us for episode 3, where we will explore popular pastimes in the 1800s by looking at some of Barnum House's artifact collection.